Kaplan from the American Guitar Academy, here with Mr. John Scofield, the legend himself. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Michael.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I wanted to basically make this interview about language and how one goes about learning a language, but more importantly, developing their own voice.
Uh-huh.
And
yeah.
Your voice on the instrument is so distinctive. There's very few people, a handful or maybe two handfuls of people that you hear one note and you know who it is. There's a plethora of amazing guitarists, but how do you know, how did that work for you?
You know, I've got to say that I don't think I really worked on it specifically, but I was aware that that was what we were supposed to do. That music and jazz especially allowed, you know, your own voice to come through. You were supposed to sound different from other people. In order to be somebody, you were supposed to have your own thing. But at the same time, you learn the music, which is just the music, and you have to learn from others. So even though I knew, I never thought, well, I've got to do I just knew that everybody had to do their own thing to a certain extent. And I liked that eccentricities were, you know, valued in jazz music. You know, that like there could be somebody like Thelonious Monk on piano who would be so different from Bill Evans on piano, and then that was okay. That was their sound, and same thing works on guitar. So I was aware of that, but I guess there was there's a built-in something that goes off when you're playing something that's just a blatant cliche or something, you know.
Like a radar.
Yeah, and that gets more refined the more you're able to play, you know. Okay, that being said, I think that a lot of my style has to do with what I can't do. You know, there are things that I would like to do on the guitar that are really hard for me to do. Either maybe I'm just not built that way, or I haven't practiced enough. I'm not sure. You know, like alternate picking, really fast alternate picking is very difficult for me. So early on, I started with rock and blues and stuff where guys would hammer on, you know.
A lot more slurs and stuff.
Yeah, the slurs. And then one of my favorite jazz guitarists when I was younger was Jim Hall, and he used a lot of slurs, and I loved that. It was more legato, you know. But still, if I had my druthers, I'd use that along with more picking if I could get it together, you know.
Interesting. It's
and also I wanted to play like a horn player.
Right.
I didn't listen to guitar all that much.
Right.
You know, I was just listening to all these other instruments.
So you can't.
I mean, in blues and stuff, I would listen to guitar.
Sure.
You know, B.B. King and Albert King and all that.
Yeah.
Clapton, Hendrix, Jeff Beck. Love that. But I didn't really follow that route. You know, I was always in jazz, but incorporating rock or whatever in that. So I wanted to play like a horn player.
Interesting that you said you feel your style might be partly due to what you can't do.
Yeah.
I heard that about Count Basie or somebody. You know, it's like somebody I just couldn't do it, like Oscar Peter, whoever. You know, I don't know. So,
but he's the greatest example of minimalism.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
With just making it work so well and just unabashed. You know, he really knew what he was doing, because it's just. It draws you in. It's like, wow, how little can somebody play? And it's swinging like crazy, you know.
How you know, from the perspective of language, as you said, you didn't consciously work on your own style, let's call it your own voice, but you knew that was part of the game was I gotta stand out, or I don't want to sound like, as much as you might admire West or whoever, you want to sound like yourself. One thing that I've noticed that seems to go along with these guys that do have their own voice it's not only in jazz. I mean, Santana would be a good example in rock, you know. But these guys that have their own voice, it seems like they typically play one instrument, whether it's whoever with the PRS or the Ibanez or the you know, and it's like or Stern with his specific, you know, it's young. They got their instrument,
Well, I think,
which might be part of.
That's part of it, I'm sure. And
not changing guitars all the time.
you know, first of all, in order to change guitars all the time, it becomes an economic thing.
Right.
I mean, you know, a Clapton or whoever, you know, has a guy who is right by the side of the stage with a rack of 12 guitars.
Right.
And also, sounds really stupid, I guess, but he doesn't have to do the change himself. I've brought other guitars, and in order to take it off,
You have to do it.
and then pick it up and get
Tune
the
the other
strap
one.
and get the thing. Yeah, it takes a long time. But Clapton or whoever, you know, the guy comes over and it's like having a dresser, you know, like having somebody put a butler, you know, a manservant, and they just put it on you, and there
Ready
it
to
is,
go.
perfectly in tune. So that's right there. Unless you're in the pop area, it doesn't work. So the other thing is, all of us are in this tradition of one guitar thing. You know, I mean, that even goes back to you know, the blues guys and Charlie Christian, and for certainly the jazz guys. But even like, you know, remember when you would see the Beatles?
Yeah.
You know, George Harrison always had his country gentleman, and John Lennon played mostly as Rickenbacker, you know.
Albert King had the V, and
and all those guys, that was their thing.
Interesting. It's
But all the studio guys, you know, when I came to New York, everybody had a bunch of guitars, and if they were doing dates, you know, playing on records or jingles or whatever, they had to provide, had to be able to pull out a telly or
a banjo, whatever they need for the get right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. How do you you know, with the synth, with, you know, we're dealing with the instrument aside, we're dealing with melodic content, harmonic content, rhythmic content, articulation. There's so many, you know, and again, I keep saying it, hopefully this is the last time, your voice is so distinctive, and you know, it's not just about the lines, it's also about the rhythm, it's also about where are you on the beat, are you ahead, are you behind, you know.
You know, I mean, the rhythm is paramount in this kind of music. It's everything, you know, and somebody can be incredible on their instrument and have, you know, all kinds of lines, but if they can't put it,
they don't have killer time.
Yeah, you gotta. And I knew that when I was, you know, when I was younger. I mean, because of my deficiency, growing up, you know, a white kid in the suburbs whose parents weren't particularly musical, I realized right away when I heard, you know, some guys that had good time, or even kind of, you know, going past the park and hearing these guys jamming on congas on a Saturday afternoon, and like, holy shit,
what's going
my
on?
culture doesn't emphasize that the way other cultures do, and I want to work on that.
And you consciously worked on rhythm.
To this day, and
can you decide?
no,
where?
I don't. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, you play behind the beat," and I guess I do. I want it to feel good. I want it to feel relaxed. If you play too far behind the beat,
Then it's just
then
out of
it's
time.
it's out of time,
Right.
which can be cool.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to play like rubato over it if you can keep your place.
Yeah,
That's pretty awesome. But I'd like to be able to play the time too, so that it's moves the music forward without sounding like rushing. You know, it's a really subtle thing. But
yours, it's always going forward. Your lines are. I mean, when it's always moving in that direction.
When I'm on, I hope it is. And then you want to sound relaxed.
Right.
You know, so sometimes that maybe requires a little laid backness. You know.
But the time thing The time thing seems to be the hardest thing to teach. You know,
I don't
you can
know
teach
how to teach it.
You can teach people all the scales and here's stock licks and blah blah, you know, until they're blue in the face. But to teach time and feel, pocket, whatever you want to, you know, is
I have no idea
I don't
how to teach
either.
it. And there doesn't seem to be, you know, a system for that.
There doesn't. But it's
that I know of.
But it's the most
Yeah.
natural, inherent thing
Yeah.
that everybody has.
Right.
So it should
right.
be.
So we've got to be able to recognize it first. Recognize other music that has some sort of cool time element
Right.
that we want to
Emulate.
get into.
Yeah. Huh. How? So you have, obviously, you have a command of the language. Yet, like you said, that it's not like I hear cliche after cliche. So somewhere along the line, it all gets mixed up like a soup, I suppose, and comes out sounding like you.
Well, yeah, I think it does, and command of the language. It's important to learn that tradition that's passed down, which is phrases and licks and whatever. But you don't want to sound like you're just hammering out cliches. So there's a fine line.
Yeah.
And it's a language, like you said, and I continue to. Hey, look, I also steal all over the place, and everybody does.
Copy.
Yeah, that's right, because it's not illegal, is it? But everybody does,
Well,
everybody does.
You can't grow up in a bubble. I mean,
and it wouldn't be interesting if it was in a bubble, because that's the great thing about music, right? It's shared language. It's a language.
Yeah. How do you? So, because you've played in such a variety of scenarios, tonight you're playing solo, or whether it's with a trio or a big band or a jam band, whatever it is, you still sound like you regardless. But the vocabulary, I suppose, needs to be modified. I mean, you're not going to go out and play with, I don't know, the Grateful Dead or whatever's going on with them now, and play like you're playing with Bill Soup playing in a trio. You have to play more to that language.
Yeah, I think I just, to really, probably oversimplify it, is I like jazz and rock. But and it's a guitar, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I came up with rock and roll like everybody my age, our age, whatever. And but then I wanted to be a jazz musician. And there's these things that connect rock and roll and jazz, black music, they say. But so I've just got enough rock and roll vocabulary that I can play with the Grateful Dead guys, and enough jazz, but you can use a lot. That's what Miles Davis, when he started what they call fusion music. Look, it's just playing over a vamp, and people were always playing bluesy anyway. Blues exists in both forms of the music.
I guess gear, we can find all the stuff about gear and what you've been using. That model for how
million years.
Yeah, I mean, since I know,
well,
since I remember.
Right. I mean, I
remember a different wood color, sunburst color.
I have two Ibanez's that I have used for a million years. In 1981, I was here in Japan playing with Hino Teramasa, the trumpet player, and they gave me this guitar when my Gibson had warped.
335.
The 335 had warped, and I was chicken to do neck adjustments back then. The truss rod. So it was really pretty warped because of the weather or whatever. And they gave me this Ibanez. It played beautifully. I liked the sound a lot. And,
Going back to what I said a moment ago about playing in different styles and the language, the language being different. I have heard. Not everybody can sit in with everybody.
Absolutely.
You can get the most killing guy in his element, and put him somewhere else, and suddenly it falls apart.
And that's true for me too. There's a lot of kinds of music I have there would be no reason for me to be there. I shouldn't be there. I mean, I can't play bluegrass. I like bluegrass. I sort of know what it is.
But you're not going to go sit in on a bluegrass gig.
But I can't pick like that, and plus I don't know the stuff, and I can't play classical music. I'm not a classical guitarist, and I can't play Indian music, But in the little parameters of jazz related and rock and roll and whatever.
Not that little.
That music,
It's a big.
yeah, in metal I would look like a fool,
John Scofield. The next album.
I have to do a lot of shedding and get some different instruments. I might be able to do it. That'd be kind of cool.
What I mean, when you were coming up, you obviously spent a lot of time with the instrument, and was there anything specific that you remember practicing or working on that was, I don't want to say a game changer, but something like, that one thing, these couple things I did really helped me along the way type thing?
Well, if there's probably a whole lot of those things. What comes to mind right away is the 2-5-1 progression.
There's just
in jazz.
Working it out.
And to think about how to play through that, which will lead you to, the chord changes of
right. Every standard.
Of standards.
Yeah.
And so trying to get, I'm not talking about just playing the chords. I'm talking about improvising through it and playing lines that work through it.
And that was basically by ear, just figuring out the records, basically.
Yeah, but also I'd be lying if I said I didn't know about theory. I mean,
you went to Berkeley, didn't you?
Yeah, I did for 2 years, and I also took guitar lessons. I remember, I took guitar lessons when I was probably even in junior high into high school, and I took from this guy in Connecticut, where I'm from, not far from Port Chester. In Norwalk, Connecticut.
Norwalk, I
know
well.
It is.
Yeah.
And I took lessons there, and the guy was a jazz guitar player. We played club dates around and stuff. And so he knew I wanted to get into jazz. He wrote out the chords to the song "How High the Moon," and he wrote a different scale on every chord. And I'm like, okay, wait, that's how I improvise? That's impossible. So I spent years saying, what am I supposed to? And then I really loved the music, so I had a record of Charlie Parker playing that song, and I learned his little head on it, which is whatever that is, and
ornithology.
Ornithology,
maybe?
Exactly,
maybe.
Ornithology, yeah, and then I was sort of getting it by ear, but I also, the theory of the scales really did help, but it can hinder people when they think that's how you play jazz. Because you know what? The old guys like Miles and, Chet Baker and guys that I knew, they didn't use that. They learned a different way. I mean, even though they knew theory, Chet didn't know any theory. He had such an amazing ear that he could play jazz music by ear. And there's an element of that that's really important. But the theory does help me anyway.
The way that I look at it is that it was the same for me going to school. It was like, okay, this mode, that scale, this chord means this, and then you realize, like, well, wait a minute. Wes is playing a major 7 on a minor 7 chord. Wait a minute.
There's other stuff.
There's all sorts of stuff. I don't hear
chromatic.
I don't hear any scales going on here. I hear a bunch of phrases and lines, and then you realize, well, you just got to figure it out by yourself, by ear, which is the natural way to do it.
And you have to be able to play by ear.
Well, otherwise you gotta be.
I mean, if you didn't play by ear, what would you be playing? It wouldn't be music,
I mean, it would be the equivalent of, like learning a second language. Like for me to sit down and study a second language now and learn it from a book instead of like this, it'd take decades. So.
That's right. Yeah, and we learn language. A second language by ear, and you're looking at the book and saying, okay, that's what it is. But it's the same thing that learning music. That same, whatever that is, that allows us to do that.
Yeah, it's is it who have you not played with that you really want to play with? Anybody?
You know what? It's strange, but I'm a fan of a lot of really great players that I check out, but it doesn't mean that I need to play with them anymore. I used to think, oh, if I could just get with that guy,
right.
maybe I'd sound as good as them or whatever. And then I've had, and you know, when that happens, when you do get to play like with one of your idols, it's only like one chance, you know, and then it's like it's over. But what was great was getting to play with really good players a lot.
Did you play with Joe Henderson?
Yeah, I played with Joe, and we played a fair amount.
That's phenomenal.
But the main guys that I've gotten to play with have been like Joe Lovano, who I've played hundreds of gigs with, and Bill Stewart, who's been the drummer in my band for like 35 years. This guy's an unbelievable musician, you know. I mean, it's weird, the drummer with perfect pitch. What's that? You know, getting to play with people a bunch so that everybody learns about each other and we can improvise together and make a group sound together. That's what I love.
All right, I'll make it the last question. What was it like playing with Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker?
Oh, well.
How old were you?
Well,
20?
Yeah, I was 22.
Okay, 22.
But that's pretty young, and I didn't.
I mean, Jerry Mulligan.
Jerry Mulligan was incredible. And now this, you know, I didn't play that much with those guys, but with Jerry,
it's a live album, no?
Yes. I was in Jerry's band, but just for a little while. I had gotten a gig with him. And I was living in Boston, but I was done with going to Berkeley. I was just playing around and living there. And
how'd you get the gig?
And he had his regular quartet that was working, and he wanted to augment it with guitar and vibes. And he asked Alan Dawson, the drummer, and I knew Alan because he was a teacher in Berkeley. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, this kid, he could do it." And so me and Dave Samuels, the vibraphonist, played a week with Jerry at the Jazz Workshop in Boston, and it was great, man. I just loved it. I was a fan of Jerry's, and he was very nice to us.
Must have been fun.
But then, the next gig, he was like, okay, I want to do more stuff with you guys. The next gig was at Carnegie Hall with Jerry's band, but also Chet joined us on a few tunes. And so
you're 22 years old playing Carnegie Hall with Jerry Mulligan.
It's the last time I played Carnegie Hall. I was so nervous, it was unbelievable.
Oh, I couldn't,
But that was the first record I was on.
Wow.
And then, right at that same time, I joined Billy Cobham's band, and then that was it. I was on the road with Cobham, you know. Yeah.
Been on the road ever since. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
I really, really appreciate it.
Good talking to you, man.
Thank you. Once again, Michael Kaplan from the American Guitar Academy. Very grateful to Mr. John Scofield for having us here, and check him out, The Blue Note. Thanks a lot.